Okay, so we're looking at integers with powers. Okay, integer operations with powers. So the first example, which one's the base? What's the base of this first power? -2 is the base. How many times do I have to write the base? 3 times. So whenever we have a negative times a negative times a negative, well, what's a negative times a negative? Positive. And a positive times a negative? So our answer should be negative. 2 times 2 times 2? 8. Again, the base is what? -2. How many times do I have to write it? So we have -2 times -2 times -2 times -2. And we have a negative and a negative is a positive. And we have another negative and negative, which is 2 positives make positive. What's your final answer? Positive 16. Okay, again, base is -2. How many times do I write it? Twice. 2 negatives make a positive. Positive 4. Okay, so again we have a negative and a negative, which is another negative and negative. And then we have positive, positive, and a negative, which is a negative. Good. What's the answer? -32. So if the base is negative, this only works if the base is negative. If the exponent is an even number, so for example, 2, 4, 6, 8, the result will always be a positive. Okay, if you think about it, if I have an even number of negatives, if I have 2 negatives give me a positive. If I have another 2 negatives, again, I'm going to get a positive. Another 2 negatives. The result, if it's an even number, if the exponent's an even number, it means you're multiplying the base an even number of times. Your result will always be positive. So if the exponent is an odd number, for example, 3, 5, 7, 9, the result will always be negative. If I have an odd number, well, a negative and a negative give me a positive, but then a positive and a negative is always going to be negative. Okay? First, we have to figure out which part of this is the base. -2 to the power of 3. Which part is the base? Right. Because there's no bracket, this here indicates that my power is a negative power. This is the power. So the base is actually positive. Okay, the base is just 2. This tells me that the power is going to be negative. So the answer is going to be negative. And then I have to figure out, well, what's 2 to the power of 3? What's 2 times 2 times 2? So it's going to be negative 2 times 2 times 2. This is my power because there was no bracket indicating that the base was negative. So the answer will be what? -8. Down. Again, we have a negative outside the bracket, so I'm going to write that first. And now I'm going to solve my power. Well, we have -2 to the power of 3. What happens when you have a negative base and the exponent's an odd number? What happens? Yep. Ira? The answer will be negative. So let's just solve the power. What's -2 to the power of 3? We did it over here for A, -8. But we still have this negative outside the bracket. So we have -8. What happens when you have 2 negatives put together? So what's the answer? +8 or just 8. Okay, so let's look at A. Again, what do you notice is outside the power? There's a negative. So let's just solve the power. We have a -2 to the power of 4. So it's a negative base with a with an even exponent. The answer will be what? Positive. So we have a negative outside the bracket. And what's -2 to the power of 4? Positive 16, good. But we had a negative outside our bracket, so we have to apply that negative. A negative and a positive gives us, so the answer is negative 16. For B, is the base negative? Who thinks the base is negative? Who thinks it's positive? Right, because there's no bracket, this is the power. I have a negative power. Well, what's 2 to the power of 4? 16. This is the power, and that is 16, but then there's a negative outside the bracket, so the answer is negative 16. Okay, even though our exponent's an even number, that rule only applies if the base is negative. In this case, my base is just 2. The negative is there to indicate that it's a negative power. Okay, so looking inside the bracket, what is the base of this power inside the bracket? It's just 2. It's just 2 to the power 4. This indicates that my power is negative. It's inside the bracket though. So we have a negative outside the bracket, and then we have an indication that we have a negative power, right? There was no bracket inside the bracket. So what's 2 to the power of 4? Okay, so we just did this. 2 to the power of 4 is 16. Negative and a negative. So the final answer is positive 16 because we have 2 negatives here.
Made with Doodlecast Pro.